Hey everyone, this is Revenge Heat. Let me jump straight into tonight's story. My grandmother died on a Tuesday. By Friday, my mother had stood up in front of 30 people at the reception and pointed at me across the room. She was always the greedy one, she said, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. Couldn't even wait until the body was cold. The room went silent. Every head turned. I felt my face go hot, then cold, then completely numb. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I set down my paper plate, picked up my coat, and walked out the front door without saying a single word. 9 years later, my phone buzzed at 6 in the morning with 41 missed calls from my mother, and a voicemail that started with 4 words that changed everything. They found the letter. My name is Leah. I'm 31 now. People who know me through work see someone organized, careful, the kind of person who keeps detailed notes and never lets a deadline slip. They see the apartment I decorated myself, the promotion I earned without anyone's help, the way I laugh easily at lunch like I've always been this comfortable in my own skin. They don't see the 20-year-old I used to be. The one who stood in a parking lot after her grandmother's funeral reception with nowhere to go and a family that had just decided, in the span of about 4 minutes, that she was a thief. My grandmother was the kind of woman who kept hard candy in every pocket and remembered exactly how you took your coffee. She'd raised 3 kids alone after my grandfather left, built a small life in a quiet part of Ohio, and spent the last decade of her life doing things she'd never had time for before. Gardening, watercolor painting, long phone calls with her grandchildren on Sunday evenings. She called me every week without fail. We talked about everything: my classes, her tomato plants, the mystery novel she was reading, the way certain kinds of light reminded her of places she'd been before I was born. When she got sick, I drove 3 hours every other weekend to sit with her. I brought her audiobooks and the good tea she liked, and I stayed as long as I could before the drive back. I was close to her in a way I'd never been close to my mother. I think my mother knew that. I think it bothered her more than she ever admitted. When my grandmother passed, the grief hit me the way I hadn't prepared for. Not dramatically, but quietly, like a sound getting slowly turned down until the room is just silence. I kept reaching for my phone on Sunday evenings and then remembering. I cried in my car, more than I cried anywhere else because my dorm room walls were thin and I didn't want my roommate to hear. The will was read at a small meeting with a local attorney. My grandmother had divided what she had simply and without drama, as she did everything. My mother received the largest portion. My uncle received the house furniture and tools. A few smaller amounts went to her church and to a neighbor who had helped her with errands during her illness. I received $1,200, not $12,000, $1,200, enough for a semester of textbooks, maybe a little help with rent. My grandmother had written beside my name in her own handwriting. For my Leah, who always called. That was it. That was everything I needed. My mother's face at that reading was unreadable. She nodded, asked a few quiet questions about timelines, and thanked the attorney. On the drive back to the house where the reception was being held, she was almost eerily pleasant. She asked me if I'd eaten, if the drive from school had been long, whether I needed gas money for the return trip. I remember thinking it was strange how normal she was being, but I was too exhausted with grief to examine it. The reception was at my aunt's house. Extended family, neighbors, my grandmother's church friends, a few people I barely recognized. I was standing near the kitchen, refilling a cup of water, when I heard my mother's voice rise slightly above the general murmur of the room. I turned and realized she was in the center of the living room, holding her phone out like she was displaying something, talking to my grandmother's oldest friend, a woman named Donna who had known our family for 30 years. I moved closer without thinking. I heard the phrase "taking advantage" and then my name, and then I was close enough to hear everything. My mother was showing Donna a series of text messages. From me to my grandmother, from 6 weeks before she died. She was reading them aloud in a voice that was measured and sad, like a person delivering difficult news rather than an accusation. "Can you help me with rent this month? I'm short. I don't want to stress you, but the deadline is Friday." I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. She showed the screen around to the small cluster of people that had gathered. She was texting her while she was barely able to sit up in bed, my mother said. I didn't want to say anything during the reading, but I think people here who loved her should know. I stood there, completely still. Because those texts were real. I had sent them, But I had also paid my grandmother back within 3 weeks, and she had told me herself that she was glad I'd asked, that she liked feeling useful, that she didn't want me struggling alone in that apartment. We had talked about it openly, warmly, the way we talked about everything. There was nothing hidden, and nothing shameful. But my mother had cut the conversation. She was showing the requests and not the responses. She was showing the asks and not the repayments. She was presenting a fragment of something and calling it the whole picture. I stepped forward. "Mom." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "You're not showing the whole conversation." She looked at me, and her expression did something I'll never forget. It didn't flinch. It held, steady, and practiced, like a mask that fit perfectly. "Leah, sweetheart, I'm not trying to start something. She paid me back," said my grandmother's oldest friend, Donna, slowly. Donna looked at my mother. "Helen, Margaret told me about that. She said Leah paid her back, and then some. She used the extra to buy herself a new set of brushes." There was a brief, thin silence. Then my mother shook her head gently, as if Donna had misremembered. "Mom was very confused those last few weeks. You know how it was." She looked back at the room and repeated what would become the sentence I'd hear echoing for years. "She was always the greedy one. It's just hard to see someone you love be taken advantage of." Before I tell you what happened when I finally walked out, let me ask you something. What time is it where you are, and how far is this story going to travel tonight? Drop it in the comments. I'll read every single one. I left because I didn't trust what would come out of my mouth if I stayed. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and pressed my palms flat against the steering wheel until I could feel my own pulse slowing down. Then I drove 4 hours back to school because I couldn't think of a single other place to go. Over the following days, the messages started. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in months. An aunt who sent a short text that said only, "I hope you'll do the right thing." My uncle left a voicemail asking if I wanted to talk, but the tone of it made clear he had already decided what he believed. My mother did not call at all, which told me more than any of the others. She had done what she needed to do, and she was letting it settle. I called Donna. She picked up on the second ring and listened while I explained the full conversation, the full repayment, the whole truth. She believed me. I could hear it clearly. But she also said, quietly and with genuine regret, "Honey, your mother is very convincing when she wants to be. She told me she'd try to say something to the right people. I don't know if she did, or if it mattered. What I did know was this. I was 20 years old, 2 semesters from graduating, with no family financial support, a mother who had just publicly accused me of exploiting a dying woman, and a network of relatives who had chosen, almost unanimously, not to ask me directly for my side. The support I'd been counting on, a small loan my mother had loosely promised for my final semester costs, disappeared without a single conversation. She didn't tell me it was gone. She just stopped responding. So, I did what I had to do. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I picked up weekend shifts at a restaurant 30 minutes from campus. I borrowed a textbook from the campus library and returned it before the late fee kicked in. I budgeted in a spreadsheet I checked every 3 days, and I did not allow myself to fall apart because falling apart was something I could not afford. There was one professor, a woman who taught a research writing seminar, who noticed something was wrong without me saying anything. She pulled me aside after class one afternoon and said, "You look like someone who's trying very hard to hold something together. Do you want to talk, or do you want me to just tell you you're doing fine and let you go?" I told her I just needed to know I wasn't failing. She looked at my work, looked at me, and said, "You are nowhere near failing." That was it. That was the moment I stopped feeling like I was about to drown. She also told me something I wrote in the back of my planner that night. Documentation is its own form of dignity. Write things down, date them, keep them. I didn't fully understand why I was writing it, but I did. I graduated. I moved to a new city. I built something small, and then something medium, and then something I was genuinely proud of. I did not contact my mother. A few relatives reached out over the years, gently, carefully, and I responded politely, but briefly. The connection never rebuilt itself. Some doors that close under enough weight don't easily reopen. Then, 3 weeks before my 31st birthday, I got a phone call from an attorney's office in Ohio. Not my grandmother's original attorney, a different one. A woman who had worked with a paralegal named Ruth, who had been a close friend of my grandmother's from her church. Ruth had passed away the previous year, and her family, while clearing her home, had found a sealed envelope and a folder of documents inside a locked box. The documents referenced a separate arrangement my grandmother had made, quietly, with Ruth's help, approximately 8 months before she died. The attorney explained it to me in the careful language that lawyers use when they are trying to be precise and kind at the same time. My grandmother had set aside an additional amount in a separate account, $12,000, specifically designated for my education costs. Not $1,200. $12,000. She had done it privately because, the attorney said, based on the accompanying letter, she had been worried it would cause conflict within the family. She had trusted Ruth to ensure I received it after things had settled. Ruth had intended to contact me. Then Ruth had gotten sick herself, and the envelope had sat in that box for 9 years. There was also a handwritten letter. 4 pages. My grandmother's handwriting, slightly shakier than I remembered from when I was small. The attorney had not read it. She told me it was sealed with my name on the front, and that she would send it to whatever address I provided. I sat on my kitchen floor after that call. Not dramatically, just because my legs stopped working correctly for a few minutes. 9 years. That letter had been sitting in a box for 9 years while I worked restaurant shifts on weekends and checked a budget spreadsheet every 3 days and told myself that being okay was enough. The letter arrived on a Thursday. I put it on my counter and did not open it for 2 days. I needed to be ready for whatever it said. When I finally opened it, I read it twice before I cried. My grandmother wrote about the Sunday phone calls. She wrote that she knew things were difficult between me and my mother, and that she'd been worried about me for years. She wrote that she didn't want me to ever feel like asking for help was shameful. She wrote that the loan I'd asked for had made her feel trusted, and that she'd been happy to give it. She wrote, "You were always the honest one, Leah. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." She had known. She had seen something clearly enough to protect me in advance, quietly, through a locked box and a friend she trusted. And she had been right. I made a copy of the letter. I made 3 copies. I photographed every page and backed the images up in 2 places. Then I called the attorney back and began the paperwork to formally receive what my grandmother had set aside for me. I want you to understand that I was not thinking about my mother during any of this. I was not imagining a confrontation or planning a speech. I was reading a letter from a woman I loved and trying to absorb the fact that she had loved me that specifically and that carefully in return. My mother found out, I learned later, because the attorney's office had reached out to verify some family details and had spoken briefly with my uncle, who had mentioned it to his wife, who had mentioned it to someone else. By the time the information reached my mother, it had traveled through enough people that she already understood the shape of it before she heard the full version. She understood that there was a letter. She understood that I had read it. And she understood, I imagine, that the letter said something that did not support the story she had been telling for 9 years. The calls started on a Saturday morning. I was making coffee when my phone lit up with her name. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. I let it go again. By the time I finished my second cup of coffee, she had called 11 times. Over the course of the morning, the number climbed. By early afternoon, I had 41 missed calls and a voicemail I finally listened to while standing at my kitchen window. Her voice was different from what I remembered. Smaller somehow. She said she needed to talk to me before I did anything with the letter. She said family things were complicated and she didn't want there to be any more misunderstandings. She said, "I'm your mother, Leah. I've always done what I thought was best." Then the voicemail ended. I listened to it twice. Then I blocked her number from calling again and waited to see if she would find another way. She drove 4 hours and rang my doorbell at 7:15 on a Tuesday evening. I saw her through the peephole before I decided anything. She looked older. She was dressed neatly the way she always was, like appearance was something she used as armor. Her hands were pressed together in front of her, and she kept glancing toward the street like she was checking whether anyone she recognized might walk by. I opened the door with the chain latched. Her face, when she saw me, moved through 3 or 4 expressions, so quickly I couldn't name all of them. Relief was in there. Something that looked like guilt, though I wasn't ready to trust my reading of it. And underneath both of those, still present the way it always had been, the low-grade restlessness of someone who needs to control the outcome of a room. "Leah," she said. Her voice was careful. "Thank you for opening the door." I didn't respond to that. "What do you need?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "Can we talk? Inside, maybe. This is a conversation, not a confrontation." "No," I said. She blinked. The word had clearly surprised her. "Leah." "I'll listen through the door," I said. "You can say what you came to say." For a moment, she just looked at me, recalibrating. Then she said, "I heard about the letter. I want you to understand that I had no idea your grandmother had done that. I never knew about any separate arrangement. I want you to believe that." "What I believe," I said, "doesn't change what she wrote in it." Something shifted in her face. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper, pushing it toward the gap in the door. "I didn't take it. That's just some thoughts," she said, "about how we might handle this as a family. Moving forward. Without making things worse than they already are." "Making things worse," I repeated. "Worse for whom?" She pressed her lips together briefly. "People are asking questions now. Your uncle, his wife. There are people in this family who are going to take this the wrong way, and I want to get ahead of that. I just need you to understand that whatever happened 9 years ago, I was doing what I thought was right. I was trying to protect what your grandmother left." "You were protecting what she left," I said slowly. She nodded. She was confused near the end. "I was worried about people taking advantage." "She wasn't confused," I said. The steadiness in my own voice surprised me. She wrote 4 pages. They are coherent and specific and dated. She was not confused. My mother's jaw tightened just slightly. "I'm not here to argue about that." "Then, what are you here for?" I asked. And there it was. The real reason, the one she'd been circling since she arrived. "I need you to tell people it's private," she said. "The letter. Whatever it says, just tell them it's a personal family matter and you're not discussing it. Because if this gets out the way I think it's going to get out, it's going to destroy relationships that have taken years to build. With your cousins, with your aunt, with people who only know one version of something that was very complicated." I looked at her for a long moment. "The version you told them," I said. She didn't answer that directly. "Leah, you have your money. You have your letter. You have whatever you need from this. Why does anyone else need to know the details?" "Because," I said, "for 9 years, people in this family believed I had done something dishonest. They believed that because you told them. Donna believed it until she didn't. My cousins believed it. My aunt believed it. You shaped what they thought of me, and you shaped it deliberately, with information you selected carefully, so that the parts that didn't support your version never saw daylight." Her expression hardened. "I was trying to protect your grandmother's memory. You were always the greedy one," I said. Her own words, back to her, quiet and even. "That's what you called me. In front of 30 people. In front of my grandmother's oldest friend. In front of people who had known me since I was a child. You said it like it was already a known fact and you were just finally letting everyone in on it." She opened her mouth and then closed it. "I didn't steal from her," I said. "I asked for help. She gave it. I paid it back." She was glad I'd asked. And separately, she made a careful and private arrangement to make sure I would have what I needed after she was gone, because she understood, better than I did at the time, that I was going to need protection from exactly this. My mother's eyes filled. "Sarah, She stopped. "Leah, I'm sorry. I should have handled it differently. I know that. You came here to ask me to protect your reputation," I said. "Not to apologize. If you were here to apologize, that's the sentence you would have started with." Her jaw worked. A tear moved down one side of her face, and she didn't wipe it. "You're going to let this ruin everything," she said. "Everything I've worked for. What people think of me. My relationships with your cousins. With this family." "You did that," I said. "I'm just here." She reached toward the door again. "Leah, please. I'm your mother. I made mistakes. I'm human. Can you please just—" "I'm going to say this once," I told her, "and I need you to hear all of it." She went still. "I'm not going to hide the letter. I'm not going to call it a private family matter. I'm not going to manage other people's understanding of what happened in a way that protects you from the consequences of what you chose to do. If relatives ask me directly, I will tell them the truth directly. That is the only thing I am obligated to do. You're punishing me, she said. Her voice had gone raw. You're choosing to punish me. I'm choosing not to lie, I said. Those are different things. You could forgive me, she said. That's what people do. Families work through things. You don't have to blow this up. I looked at her. I forgave you a long time ago, I said. I had to, for myself. I was carrying it like a stone, and I needed to put it down. But forgiving you and letting you back into my life are separate decisions. And the second one isn't something you get to ask for. It's something I offer if I decide you've earned it. Her expression broke open into something ugly and real for just a moment. You always thought you were better than everyone else, she said. The old sharpness back. So sensitive. So self-righteous. Your grandmother spoiled you. My grandmother told me the truth about myself, I said. That's not spoiling. That's love. She stood on my porch for another long second, looking at me through the gap in the door, and I could see her searching for the thing that would shift the balance, the right word, the right angle, the right version of herself to present. She was very good at that. She had been doing it my whole life, but she was doing it on my porch, and I had been practicing for 9 years. You need to go, I said. If you come back, I'll call the police and report it as harassment. If you contact me through other family members, I'll stop responding to those family members. I'm telling you this clearly so there's no confusion later. She stepped back, finally, and something in her face went flat and defeated and very small. I don't know who you became, she said. I became someone she would recognize, I said, and I closed the door. I stood in my entryway for a while, not moving. The silence of my apartment settled around me like something solid. Outside, I heard her footsteps on the porch stairs, slow and heavy, and then nothing. She didn't call from my blocked number again. She tried twice from unknown numbers that I also blocked without answering. She sent an email that I read once, noted the absence of any genuine apology, and marked as archived. A cousin called me, carefully, to ask if I was all right. I told her I was. She asked if the letter was what people were saying it was. I told her I wasn't going to speak for it publicly, but that if she wanted to understand what had happened 9 years ago, she was welcome to ask me directly, and I would answer honestly. She thanked me, and we talked for 20 minutes about other things, and I realized that the relationship wasn't destroyed, just rerouted. I sent Donna a card. She called me when she received it, and we talked for almost an hour. She cried a little, and so did I. She told me she had always known, in the way that people who have lived long enough know things without being able to prove them. She said my grandmother had trusted her instincts about people. I believed her. The trust took a few months to formally process. When the final paperwork cleared, I put a portion of the money into a savings account I named, privately, for no one but myself, for Leah, who always called. Then I took the rest and paid down a debt that had been a low-grade weight on my life for years. I didn't buy anything dramatic. I didn't celebrate loudly. I just felt, for the first time in a long time, a kind of ballast, like my feet were touching something solid. Some nights I still think about the reception, the paper plate I set down, the coat I picked up, the way 30 people watched me leave without anyone following. I think about the 20-year-old who drove 4 hours back to a dorm room because she had nowhere else to go and no one she trusted enough to call. I think about her with a kind of tenderness I couldn't have managed when I was still her. She did everything right, that girl. She kept the text messages she could find. She called the one person who believed her. She wrote things down the way her professor told her to. She didn't ask permission to survive. She just survived, quietly and without applause, and she built something out of it that no one could take back. My grandmother knew she would. That's why she wrote 4 pages. If you grew up being told you were too sensitive, too demanding, too much of something that wasn't quite right, I want you to hear this clearly. Wanting honesty is not greed. Asking for help is not weakness. Expecting people who love you to treat you accurately is not being difficult. Those things are just the basic shape of what love is supposed to look like. And if someone in your life called them character flaws, they were protecting their own story, not describing yours. You can love someone and still refuse to protect their lies. You can forgive a parent and still lock the door. You can mourn the relationship you deserved and didn't get, and still build something real out of the years that followed. These things are not contradictions. They are just what healing actually looks like when you stop waiting for someone else to make it happen. So I want to ask you honestly, and I want you to think about it before you answer. If you had been standing at that door, 9 years of silence between you, a letter in your kitchen that told the truth, and a mother who drove 4 hours not to apologize but to ask you to go quiet one more time, what would you have done? Would you have opened the door all the way? Or would you have done what I did? Drop it in the comments. Tell me open or close, and tell me why. I read every single one, and I want to know. A personal note on my mother. She is not simply a villain the way stories sometimes need. She is something more complicated, and in some ways more frightening. A person who genuinely believes that managing perception is the same as managing reality. She didn't lie because she was malicious in a simple way. She lied because she had decided, somewhere along the way, that her version of events was the only one worth protecting, and that anyone who contradicted it was a threat rather than a person. That's what made her dangerous. Not cruelty for its own sake, but the absolute certainty that her story was the one that mattered. The real consequence she faces now is not losing a job or being publicly exposed. It's that the one tool she always counted on, the ability to control what people believed, has stopped working in the rooms that matter most. And for someone who built her sense of self entirely out of that control, losing it is the one punishment she never prepared for. The lesson in all of this, the real one, is simple enough to say and hard enough to live. Truth doesn't need your help to survive. It just needs you to stop burying it. Write things down. Keep the dates. Trust the people who ask for your side before they decide. And never confuse someone's loudness for accuracy. The person who speaks first in a room is not always the one who knows what happened. Sometimes they're just the one who understood, before anyone else, how much silence is worth.